well, he moved on to a church, but he left his daughter behind, married to one of the local farmers. But anyway, so it's through her and her dad that it comes down through my spiritual heritage. And they, of course, they didn't, well, Grandma Mabel knew me, but her dad never knew me. And so there is a connection, but it's not direct from my dad to dad to dad. And when you think about it, it amazes you, really.
Yes, especially when God planned it to be your children and your children's children, and all down in generations where it was supposed to be passed to us.
Yeah.
And it don't necessarily happen.
Right.
Forgot.
Yeah, and they're gone now. They've been dead for several years. But yeah, I'd have some explaining to do to them because they were Sunday church. But you know, they were good people though, and they taught me to be a good boy, even though at times it was an uphill battle. But it wasn't for lack of their trying.
I have a interesting, when you're talking about it, is my grandfather was an evangelist, and he died when my mother was 3. And what I've heard is that he apparently, she was the first girl to survive, so he was really attached to her, and he prayed for her. And so when my grandmother, after he died, my grandmother got kicked out of the church because of wearing pants in the garden. And so my mother, she had very little religious upbringing. So when I was 3 years old, next generation, my mother decided that I needed to, all of a sudden, God put in her heart, she didn't even know God, and he put in her heart, Kathy needs to know about God. And she came to the Lord, and then I came to the Lord. But it was interesting, we're talking, my grandmother eventually came back to the Lord years and years later, but she didn't teach her children. And so we're talking a prayer of a grandfather who died, and then years later, 20 years later, God answers the prayers of the dead.
So do you believe that you're a product of your environment?
No, it doesn't have anything to do with product of environment.
You're not a product of your environment? Because I look at your story and you are a product of what was going on around you.
I'm not sure if I follow what you mean.
Well, she's talking about that her grandfather had prayed for her mother, and that those prayers were answered.
20 years later.
If you don't have a good environment around you, I doubt if you're going to go to church. I doubt if you're...
Okay, Jerry, what you missed is when my mother was in her early 20s, she decided that she should go to church, and she took me to Sunday school. And the only reason she was there, she was in a Sunday school class while I was in a Sunday school class. She thought I should learn about God. That's the only reason she went. She wanted to hear about God, not her. She wanted me to hear about God. So one day, it turns out, evangelist came to the church, and all of a sudden the Sunday school class she was going to, all of a sudden they open all the little doorways or whatever, all the separation, and all of a sudden they have this evangelist come in, and the lady that Mom sat next to all the time says, if I knew they were going to do this today, I wouldn't have come. My mother had no idea what was going on.
You're right,
And
Kathy.
he presented the gospel of
I missed all that
Yeshua. And so my mother said that she had a evil stepfather back then, and so she had a lot of hate in her heart. And so when they presented the gospel to her, it was like water. The way she said it was like you gave her, living water. And so she came to the Lord, and then God put a desire in her heart that later on, when she got saved, she knew that it was more than just learning about God. I needed God. I needed to know the Savior. And she had the same desire for my grandfather praying. She prayed for me.
And then her mother came back.
And my grandmother eventually came back to the Lord.
Yeah, that's why God says you grow close to me, and I'll grow close to you.
But it was.
See, she sought God, and God says, okay, then I'll seek you too.
Right.
Okay, well, Well, we all have some kind of a story, and we can all thank somebody for praying for us.
That's right.
Let's look, in the interest of time, let's skip down to 1633.
We don't have much
And
time
this is
left.
something that, yeah, 1633. This is something that Sherry brought up, because somebody brought it up on the internet again. And in our English, it talks about Day of Atonement, but it's actually atonements. The Hebrew word is plural. And so here in verse 1633 in Leviticus, it says, "He shall make an atonement for the holy sanctuary." So there's an atonement for the sanctuary.
SANCTU.
That's good. For the sake of the camera, let's spell it. SANCTU.
AR1.
There we go. Okay, so, make an atonement for the sanctuary, and he shall make an atonement for the tabernacle. And
The tent of the meeting.
for the altar.
The altar.
For the priests.
And all the people.
People of the
Of the community.
And all the people.
Right.
And so, and there are also, I guess depends how long, are we staying till 4 or what? Okay.
Maybe 4:31.
Okay. And so, these are part of where we would get the idea of it's a Day of Atonements, because there are several coverings being made here. And,
That must have been hard when you were sacrificing all those animals and burning them, and you're starving all day and no water.
yeah. And in Numbers 29:8, it talks about the animal sacrifices and the food sacrifices. So, Numbers 29:7, "And you shall have on the 10th day of the 7th month a holy convocation. You shall afflict your soul. You shall not do any work there. But you shall offer a burnt offering to the Lord for a sweet savor. One young bullock." So we got one bullock there, that's a young one. By that, I didn't look up the requirements, but it's probably either under 1 or 2 years old. One ram, which would be a male sheep, and 7 lambs. And these would be probably 4 year-old, under a year old, close to a year old. And all of these shall be without blemish. There is a concept here. These lambs are not perfect.
What makes them unperfect?
Huh?
What makes them unperfect?
Any number of things. The only thing is, if these perfections are within this list of blemishes, and I don't have them right here, but can't be three-legged or lame or maimed or blind or, some of these kinds of things. But
They
but
do
it
not
does
have any,
say
they do not have any blemishes. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
They shouldn't have.
That's correct.
But without blemish does not mean in and of itself perfect.
They may be a
And I
little
agree
big, they
with
may
that.
be a little little, but within the parameters
They
there.
may not be pure white, they may not,
They
So-
just don't have those specific blemishes.
Yeah, and so what I want to see is there's a difference between without blemish and perfection. Now, they might be the same thing in a given animal, but
You can't bring a sheep that has spotted wool.
It doesn't say that.
if somebody wants to and can, you might, I don't have that list of blemishes there, but I just want us to note here that it says without blemish, and there is a place that defines those
Really?
blemishes and says don't do that.
Okay.
But it does not mean perfection. But there is a concept here that does point to the perfect one. And so the concept is there, even though in the object lesson, it's not maybe, totally to the nth degree. But the concept is there in what it's pointing to. And so that's just, I guess, for a little point of clarification.
What was that guy's name that says, "I will take all your sheep that are blemished, that are spotted, and your goats that are spotted"?
Esau and Jacob.
Esau.
That was Jacob.
Okay, and he's pointing out blemishes right there. He's pointing out that I'll take those sheep.
Well, he was just
No.
taking.
He was
the sheep.
negotiating with Laban.
Yeah, he was negotiating and separating one from another so he could increase his herd.
Right.
It had nothing to do with
But
blemish.
it's a miraculous kind of a thing, because the thing that he's choosing are what we would call recessive traits. The majority of the flock won't be that way.
Right.
And so in the bargaining, he's saying, well, just give me the odd kinds of ones.
I see.
And so what God does, though, is he multiplies the odd ones. And the first thing you know, Jacob's got more sheep of these odd types than he does of the what you call the other gene, dominant type.
Well, the dominant is a purebred.
All they call them purebred. Dominant means like, in a given flock here, most of them are going to be white. So the gene that makes them white is a dominant gene. And well, every once in a while you get a black one.
Right.
That's
So you
a
don't want that in your
recessive
herd. You don't want that in your herd.
gene. Well,
You can't.
what's
Huh?
What if you wanted
just
all black
save
sheep?
you.
Well,
Yeah,
you have a
just-
black
Your
one.
herd,
Just save
Pam,
your herd.
is white. Your
But
herd
there's
is,
dominant and recessive genes within even an all-white herd. You will get a black or spotted one every
and
once
do you
in a while.
cull that out?
Well, maybe you do if
You
you
might.
don't want them, but there are people who want black wool.
But it's not a blemish, it's just a recessive gene.
Okay, example of what you're talking about is with Jacob, with all the sheep, and there's some striped and speckled. and-
Right.
Yeah, but it's a recessive, it's an odd thing, and so what Jacob is saying, well, just for my labor, just give me the odd one. And it looks like for Laban, well, that's a pretty good deal, because most of them are going to be all white. But
But it doesn't mean that sheep is a blemish.
Any lesser.
I see, okay.
And so then God multiplies the recessive types until Jacob's got more sheep than his father-in-law. And that start makes him jealous then, because that's not what he thought he was bargaining for, but
Sure.
it's God blessing Jacob.
I see.
It's like our granddaughters. We have Robin and Scott, both dark brown eyes. Both granddaughters have blue eyes, because both grandfathers have blue eyes. It's a recessive gene that comes out in the grandchildren. They're not defective. Somebody's not going to walk up and say, look, your children have blue eyes, they're defective because you have brown. It's because the recessive gene shows up.
Well, we're talking about a flock of sheep
It's the same thing.
that are all white.
It's a
They weren't
gene.
necessarily all white, though, Jerry. That's what he's saying. He picked out the ones that were speckled and said, these will be mine.
So they could care less
Because
if they...
there's less of them.
Oh, I see.
And those will be yours because there's more of them.
I see.
And Yah increased his
Yeah.
speckled sheep and so,
Right, he did.
more than he did Laban's regular sheep.
Okay, so you just wanted the speckled ones.
Well, because he was making a point to it.
Yeah.
He said, you keep the white ones and I'll take the weird ones. the
That's
odd
cool,
ones."
yeah.
Well,
Wasn't there something about a fence and something about
Yeah,
slats?
he did some things I don't totally
And nobody
understand that.
understands.
Yeah, but when you think about it, I mean, if he had something up there that barred the light, when the white ones came in to mate, they'd probably, they wouldn't be able to tell an all-white sheep from the speckled one, So maybe it had something to do with the increase, the,
Yeah, it's hard to say if it was actual manipulation
Yeah.
on his part
Yeah.
that affected the outcome, or...
I figured since it was in there, it had to have something to do with it.
Well, and it very possibly did. The problem is we don't have enough
We don't know.
information. And it may only be that God honored it when he did
Right.
whatever he did, God honored that. But here's the thing, see, what Jacob is doing is he's bargaining based on odds. and I'm just using figures, but 90% of the flock are white. 10% of them are odd colored or whatever. And so he's telling Laban that, well, I've worked all these years for your daughters and so on, but now that I've paid that off, now for the work I do now, I'll just take this 10% or whatever. And Laban thinks, oh, well, that's a good deal. He's just going to get these odd ones.
Yeah.
Well, what happened in the practice of it is, and I don't know just exactly here, but God reversed the odds. And like I say, these are just figures, but it illustrates what happened. And so what Laban thought was a good deal for him, he's already, swindled might be a little strong, but he's already swindled Jacob, and so this is God's judgment on his deceiving Jacob, who the covenant is with. And Laban, if he'd been a wise man, would have recognized that and did all he could to help him rather than keep trying to take advantage of him. And that's what Jacob tells him when they left. He said, in essence, all these times I served you for your daughters, I did your work for you, and all this time you were taking advantage of it.
He thought it was a swindle, but he was blessed because Leah's the one that produced most of his children.
Yeah, we know that God blessed him, that's for sure, but it's called, on the other hand, it's called animal husbandry. And animal husbandry means that you got great pastures, and you got lots of food, and those ewes will put out twins and triplets, and because there's an abundance of food.
And you got Yah on your side.
And you got Yah on your side, that's for sure.
Well, don't forget also the fact that Jacob came from a family that knew something about animal husbandry.
That's correct. And you also have a person that is a good shepherd, knows when to run his rams, how to feed his flock, how to take care of his sheep. And if you just let your sheep go astray and stuff, you're not going to have a good crop at the end of the year.
No, and that's where Laban couldn't really complain because Jacob took good care of him.
He did. In fact, he
It wasn't like he left him with nothing. He did. But Laban intended to keep him oppressed so he couldn't leave, is what he intended.
Well, we're going to give all the glory to God for it, so. The knowledge for Laban and everything else.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay, verse 29:9 says, and their meat offering shall, so we got here, these are animal offerings. And it's over here, I'm going to call them food, it means the word meat, but it doesn't literally mean flesh. It means food. Offering shall be flour, and then it's mingled with oil. It tells you what the ratio is.
Do we eat anything like that today, ladies?
Well, you could, I guess.
Well, I mean, what does that refer to? I mean, this flour and oil, what does that refer to?
Oil and flour, or eggs and flour,
Well, and you can take olive oil and I'm no cook, so
Yes,
if I'm wrong, but and mix
Oh, really?
it in your bread dough, and it'll make it a very rich, moist.
Type of bread?
Sounds here, that's, they were making it out of just oil and flour.
Yeah.
Just a flat bread.
It's a flat bread.
Yeah. And then it tells you, you mix them, and then 3/10 deals to a bullock and 2/10 deals to a ram. And so much for the lamb and so on. But these here require the temple as such, an altar, maybe we should say. But and so those, I just want to point out to you though, that this was what was done on that day. While we can't do them because we can't get here and access to them, it's not because it takes away anything, John, from what Yeshua did. All of these point to him. And in some places, this is called, it's referred to as the food of God. happened here, but, and, the food of God. And he questions him in one of the, I don't remember what it was right now, but he says, who will eat the can't even remember the words that he uses there now, but anyway, he's referring to these food offerings here. And because of their idolatry and so on, and it's one of the questions, how he phrases it, who's going to eat that, your offerings, because they're not acceptable. And Yeshua, or Yahweh's not going to eat them because they're not acceptable, and if he doesn't, who's going to? And in these other places where he chides them about, well, call on your gods to deliver you. Call on the gods that you serve to deliver you. And so he's chiding them about this. And so there's all of this, it points one way or another to Yeshua. It's not necessarily just his blood, because the bodies are included here. There's directions given for what to do with the body, and so on. And so what does he say in this portion? He said, these words are your life. And it's just another way of saying, that this food here points to here, and food sustains life. And these words are food. They're both, they're primary spiritual food, but he's saying you want to live long in the land, so it even affects the physical, if you will obey them. And then, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out. Well, these are words that are teaching us about what sustains that life, what gives you life, and what sustains it. And so, to that extent, John, all of this over here is teaching us something about Yeshua, but it's not taking anything away from him. It's pointing to some aspect of his messiahship. And he says, unless you drink my blood and eat my flesh, I forget what the rest of it is, you can't enter into the kingdom or something like that. Well, are we supposed to literally do that? On the one hand, that's cannibalism if it were to be literally done, and according to the food laws, people don't have split hooves and chew cud, and so you're not supposed to be eating other people. But it's the spiritual aspect of all this that's being pointed to. It's his blood that washes us. It's his body that heals us. The stripes that he took in his body are the basis of God healing us. So he took our infirmities on. That's a body. All right. That's all I got. Is there any other questions? Comments? Disputation? Arguments? John?
Is Yeshua the bread of life that sustains life?
Well, we got all sorts of indications that he is. He said that he's the manna that was represented in the desert.
Yeah.
Down.
Yeah.
So that manna points to him. All of these animal sacrifices here, as far as the food aspect of it. See, when the priest does these sacrifices and then he roasts the haunch, say, and he sits down to eat it in the holy place there. When he does that, he's having a communion meal with God. He's eating this roast or whatever it is, but it's in the presence of God. And that roast represents Yeshua. He sustains us with what he did. Now, it's done through the Holy Spirit. It's his death on the cross, his resurrection.
Do you know that in Ezra 3, for Yom Kippur, or at least the beginning of the month. It says, "And when the 7th month came, and the sons of Israel were in the cities, the people gathered together as one man to Jerusalem. Then Jeshua the son of Jozadak and his brothers, the priests, and Zerubbabel the son of Shealtiel and his brothers arose and built the altar of the God of Israel to offer burnt offerings on it, as it is written in the law of Moses, the man of God. So they set up the altar on its foundation, for they were terrified because of the people of the land, and they offered burnt offerings on it to the Lord, burnt offerings morning and evening, and they celebrated, this is for Sukkot, the Feast of Booths, as it is written, and offered the fixed number of burnt offerings daily according to the ordinances as each day required. And afterward there was a continual burnt offering, also for the new moons, and for all the fixed festivals of the Lord that were consecrated from everyone who offered a freewill offering to the Lord. From the first day of the 7th month they began to offer burnt offerings to the Lord. But the foundation of the temple of the Lord had not been laid." No temple.
Well, but the place was there with the altar. We rebuilt the altar on the place apparently.
But evidently, you don't need the temple, you
Oh,
just need
yeah,
the
no,
altar.
that's why I say, it's, no, right, that's.
Get up there and do that, go to your altar.
Yeah, that gives you a different picture of the end times. They just set their altar up in the place that they believe to be the temple.
How about where are the temple?
Well, maybe that's the other
It's a
idea.
different it's another
Maybe
temple.
you don't need a physical temple yet, as long as the altar is in the place that God has put his name. I don't know, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
that's what I said, I'm a Glen
So
Beck,
God
I'm just
put-
saying.
Yeah, and a part of that though was, see, of course, they eventually, they did get it built, but they couldn't do it instantaneously all at once, so they started with this. And so, well, is it necessary? It is if you can do it, because there's supposed to be these divisions.
The focus is on the offerings, not the building itself, so they went ahead with the offerings up front before they built the temple.
Well, it's a case of doing as much as they could do. And they're making a judgment there that, well, it's okay if you just have the altar to do this and then build the rest of it around.
So why not do that now?
Now, maybe they were right, maybe they weren't, but apparently they were, because there's no indication that God judged it in a negative way.
Right, so why not go ahead and continue that now?
Because,
Same direction.
Well, because
You've done it
the
wrong.
Arabs,
Yeah.
the Muslims won't allow it, yeah. And not everybody realizes the dirty trick that Moshe Dayan did when he turned that back over to these Muslim clerics there in the 67 war.
you're trying not to start World War III yet.
Well, I mean, they had control of it, all they had to do was keep control, couldn't nobody take it away from them, he gave it away.
He was the leader of Israel at that time?
Well, he was, I think, the general, I don't know if he was the main general or what, but he was at least one of the high up generals. He was a general in the
General.
Israeli army,
Of an army,
of the Israeli army.
but not the prime minister.
Well, not at that point, he
It's still been there.
was. I don't remember. I can remember happening, the news of it and so on.
So I have been, but I'm not sure.
Well, if they took it back, who are they gonna fight?
They took it back.
Yeah, who are they gonna fight?
The world.
Well, it'd be interesting to see, I guess. I mean, to me, that'd be the right thing to do.
Take it back.
Take it back, let the Vatican holler, let the Muslims holler, let the United States holler. But I mean, who knows what would happen, but at the very least it would do probably cause rioting.
Yeah. So you'd have every Muslim down your throat.
In Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Rioting
Well,
in
the neighboring
streets,
countries
probably.
too. Every Muslim going would be on your doorstep.
The thing of it is, it isn't gonna matter because the thing is coming to a head here anyway. And so.
But you can't
it's a
fight
question.
every Muslim in the world.
Huh?
You can't fight every Muslim in the world. They will.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, very good, Sherry. Yeah, I
I
can.
hope it will.
Well, you should do the right thing and let God sort them out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And that's what they're doing.
well, but they aren't.
They aren't.
They didn't do the right thing when they gave that away. They're not doing the right thing giving any of that land away.
Right.
They're not doing the right thing by pulling those settlers out of those areas. That they saw it as obeying Torah. They were to move into the land, settle the land, and take control of it. And that's what those guys were attempting to do.
And also the Golan Heights, they need to remain there.
Well, so far, they've kept control of that. Probably will to the last, but who
The
knows?
same amount of timidity as the Israelites did when they sent in the spies. And I think they're getting the same results too.
Yeah.
But it's interesting though, because this is another thing I wanted to go in and saying that when we were talking about the Edomites, you know. There's a reason that Yah protected them during those wars and kept them through in the whole world, basically. They were surrounded by enemies and they were winning. That didn't happen because they were so mighty and powerful. This happened because they had Elohim on their side.
They
So,
were
you know,
praying in the field. In the
Yeah.
battlefield, they were praying.
Yeah, they did, and see, the problem is, though, you and I know that, but Israel in general won't recognize it. It doesn't mean he wasn't helping, but they don't want to recognize it. I mean, there are individuals and groups who do, but as a nation, they don't.
They're still a secular nation.
Well, and that's why they give land away or not give it away, because they kept it and they conquered it and they did it.
You don't think they understand that they had divine help in those wars?
I mean, there are some
Not
who do,
willing
of
to
course.
acknowledge it.
Yeah, there are some who do, but the government is full of atheists.
I understand, I just
Excuse me.
can't see how they could possibly think they did it on their own, you know?
That's on tape, Jim.
Well, see, I had a friend who was half Jewish. He never told me for a long time, so I didn't realize it, because he didn't really look that Jewish, and he didn't do anything particularly Jewish, because he's bad, but he knew the wars plenty. And I kept sticking up for Israel, and he kept, and he was coming in, and I thought, well, he's just, being argumentative kind of, just to see what I'll say. So one day he finally admitted, no, that, and I can't remember what the name was, but he was half Jewish. He said, no, they should have a secular government, and we should have. He's actually a British citizen. He's over here as a resident here. And every nation should have a secular government. And what that says, whatever all else it says, is that they're not going to come under God's commandments. They're not going to come under Torah. They should be secular. And
That's the same thing,
yeah,
separation of church and state. It's
Right. Right, but the problem is that too many in Israel, that's the way they think. They got what they want. Granted, there's some that want to change, but until you get enough people, you can't change it. And one of the things that's happening to them is that they're just population-wise, they're losing the battle for voters, because the Palestinians are increasing, the Muslims are increasing, and they can see there's going to come time when they're going to be outvoted. And
That's
they'll
why I don't
lose
want to
control.
give them a vote. They
Yeah.
will let them, they'll allow them to live there. It's in the Israel My Glory, it says,
Yeah.
we want them to live side by side with us in peace. They will have no military, and they will have no vote,
Yeah.
but they will live under our laws, and they're fine if they want to obey that, but of course, they don't want that. know
Right.
Israel.
They don't.
And they want to control Jerusalem
Right.
and on and on and on. And they're not going to concede, and hopefully Israel doesn't concede.
Yeah, well, and see, and the problem is that, that we don't really back them. We want a two-state, settlement. And as long as it's within those land grant boundaries, it's anti-Torah, and it's not, that aspect anyway, is not going to be blessed.
And here's the funny thing, because demographics are, that even in our country,
Yeah.
that, they are procreating a lot faster than we are, to the point where they're gonna, and Europe is scared to death, because they're
Oh,
about
yeah,
to take
France is
over.
on the run
So,
already.
I mean, we want them to give away half of Palestine, and what's gonna happen? Are we gonna give the,
Yeah.
and let them take over when they outnumber the rest of us here?
Well, you know what? They're asking them to do something we wouldn't do.
Yeah, exactly.
We are one nation, many peoples, one law. Well, they're wanting Israel to be two nations with separate laws and conceding all these things. They're asking them to do something we would never do. What did they say? What would Canada do if, or what would the U.S. do if Canada invaded us? We'd attack them, and we'd say, no, get back over there on your own side. But they want
Yeah.
the Palestinians to have free reign in another state, part of Jerusalem, and on and on and on.
Yeah, well, and see, and they aren't, it isn't just the Palestinians, it's the Roman Catholics, see, they advocate and lobby strong for an international Jerusalem, because they want their tentacles so you have a lot of outside.
Canada last night, I knew, I just heard it, I knew it was you.
No, I don't recall that. Well, a lot of this stuff is going on, and when we look at it, we don't see any natural solution to it, because as long as we don't, force them out and force them to establish a state outside, there isn't going to, from our point of view, there isn't going to be any resolution to it. And we're making the same mistake. In my opinion, it should be against the law to be a Muslim in this country. It should be outlawed. They never should be allowed to come in here.
No, you can't. It's freedom of religion. That's what the United States Constitution is made of.
But
It's the way it is.
That may be, but see, even they aren't secular. If they get control, which if things keep going the direction they are, they will at some point. It may be 100 years, maybe 200 years.
They're not gonna allow us the freedom we have if they get control.
No.
They won't allow a secular
Yeah.
state. It'll be a Muslim state once they get control.